Have you ever stopped to think that what we now call a drug, surrounded by prejudice, was, for millennia, one of the most respected tools for healing, spirituality, and wisdom? That's right. What no one tells you, and few dare to admit, is that sacred mushrooms, once revered by the Aztec and Mayan peoples as portals to the divine, have traveled an astonishing path, from brutal repression to scientific consecration. And here's a counterintuitive truth. Maybe what's missing in your life isn't more control, but more connection. We live in a society that promises happiness in pills, maximum productivity, and off-the-shelf spirituality, while ignoring the ancient paths that led entire generations to find meaning, healing, and transcendence through contact with nature. Believe me, there's an entire world you still don't know, hidden in the history of sacred mushrooms. And the most surprising part, it has never been more accessible than it is right now. Get ready, because on this journey, you're about to discover how these small beings, once consumed in secret temples in the Mexican mountains, have now become protagonists in contemporary spiritual ceremonies, groundbreaking psychiatric treatments, and even the secret fuel behind the creativity of great geniuses in technology and art. It's no exaggeration. What was once seen as sin is now studied by scientists and sought by those looking for healing from deep traumas. And yes, here's the controversy. Maybe everything you've been taught about these mushrooms is wrong. Maybe you don't need more medicine, but more rituals. Not more entertainment, but more expansive experiences. Not more gurus, but more respect for the ancestral traditions that knew, long before modern science, how to heal wounds we didn't even know how to name. This is a journey that few dare to take, but one that you're about to experience now. And I promise you, when it's over, you will never look at a mushroom the same way again. The ancient Aztec and Mayan peoples understood, long before any modern laboratory, the immense power hidden in nature's most discreet corners. Just imagine, when they found small mushrooms sprouting after the tropical rains, they didn't just see food, they saw living portals to the divine. They called them Teonanacatl, which poetically means flesh of the gods. And no, this wasn't just a metaphor. For them, consuming these mushrooms was literally a communion with the gods. It was the chance to break through the veil of the material world and communicate with ancestral forces, a privilege reserved for only a chosen few. Don't think these rituals were done carelessly, not at all. On the contrary, they followed a discipline almost scientific in nature. Before consuming the Teonanacatl, the shaman or priest would undergo prolonged fasting, purifying baths in sacred rivers, and offer carefully prepared gifts. It was a process filled with symbolism and intention. The mushrooms were not seen as a drug, but as living beings, endowed with their own spirit, capable of guiding, healing, or punishing, depending on the respect they were shown. It's like what we now call set and setting when talking about psychedelics. But they knew this millennia ago. In religious ceremonies, the Teonanacatl held a central and non-negotiable role. Picture the scene. An imposing stone temple with candles and incense filling the air with the fragrance of copal, while the priest, guided by the power of the mushrooms, led the crowd in hypnotic chants. It wasn't just a spectacle, it was healing, it was pure spirituality. The sick were brought in, troubled souls sought relief, and leaders sought guidance for decisions that would affect the lives of thousands. The sacred mushroom was the link between the human and the cosmic, a spiritual key. The Mesoamerican peoples had a worldview so profound that it can truly boggle the mind of anyone today, used to cold Cartesian logic. For them, reality wasn't linear but composed of multiple overlapping and interwoven layers. The consumption of Teonanacatl temporarily opened portals to these other realms, where one could encounter gods, ancestors, and even natural spirits. Fascinating, isn't it? This knowledge, passed down from generation to generation, was guarded carefully, like someone protecting a map to other dimensions. But pay attention, these rituals weren't held just anywhere. Often they took place in secret locations, hidden. From the crowds, sacred mountains, damp caves, temples concealed within the jungle. These places were chosen with great care, charged with spiritual energy. It's kind of like what we talk about today as power spots, like Machu Picchu or Stonehenge, where people feel a different vibration. In Mesoamerica, this sense of sacredness was even more explicit, and only the initiated could participate in these intense ceremonies. And here's the most incredible part, something you may have never stopped to consider. These rituals shaped their entire culture. It wasn't just an isolated religious experience, but a true civilizational pillar. Their art, architecture, astrological calendars, all of it was interwoven with this worldview where mushrooms were an indispensable spiritual tool. Today, scholars are still amazed to find detailed representations of these mushrooms in Mayan sculptures and paintings, filled with a rich symbolism that we are still trying to fully decipher. And see how history is full of ironies. While many today treat mushrooms with prejudice or superficiality, for those ancient peoples, they were a direct bridge to the mystery of existence, a tool for wisdom, healing, and transformation. Curious, isn't it? Because even with all the technology and information we have now, many people are still searching for that deep connection that the ancients mastered with such brilliance. And you know what's even more interesting? This knowledge, despite everything, never completely disappeared. When the Spanish conquerors set foot on Mesoamerican lands, they brought not only weapons and diseases, but also an implacable and rigid worldview. Imagine the shock. On one side, cultures that revered mushrooms as Teonanacatl, the flesh of the gods. On the other, a Christian empire that saw any non-Christian spiritual manifestation as the work of the devil. The impact was brutal, a true collapse of worlds. Within just a few decades, entire civilizations were decimated, and with them, many of the ancestral secrets surrounding the sacred use of mushrooms were lost. Rituals that were once openly celebrated in temples and on mountaintops came to be seen with suspicion, persecuted as pagan and satanic practices. The Church, determined in its mission to save souls, waged war against these customs. Priests and inquisitors spread fear, associating mushrooms with witchcraft and diabolical pacts. Many shamans were hunted down, tortured, or executed. And notice, it wasn't just a spiritual repression, it was also political. Whoever controlled access to the sacred controlled the people. A bitter lesson about power, one that still repeats itself today in other contexts. One of the most devastating blows was the systematic destruction of the codices, those richly illustrated books in which Mesoamerican peoples recorded their knowledge, including the rituals with sacred mushrooms. It's as if someone today were to burn down every library in the world, erasing precious memories and wisdom. Few codices survived, and the ones that did still intrigue archaeologists and historians, who try, piece by piece, to reconstruct that lost knowledge. It's a powerful reminder that knowledge is not indestructible. It must be protected and nurtured. Yet, even under such severe repression, the knowledge did not disappear entirely. Like a seed finding refuge in the cracks of a rock, the tradition survived through oral transmission, whispered from generation to generation. Some indigenous communities, isolated in mountainous regions or remote forests, continued practicing the rituals hidden from the inquisitor's eyes. This silent resistance is one of the most admirable aspects of human history, the ability to keep a flame alive, even when everything around conspires to extinguish it. Want a practical example? Think of the Mazatec communities in the present-day state of Oaxaca, Mexico. There, even centuries after colonization, ancestral practices involving sacred mushrooms have remained alive, preserved almost intact. This was only possible because these people understood the importance of protecting their knowledge, avoiding exposing it to those who might destroy it. It's a powerful lesson about discretion and cultural resistance that, by the way, applies to any of us when we seek to preserve something valuable in hostile environments. The silence imposed by the colonizers was not just the absence of voices, but a deliberate attempt to erase an entire worldview. Imagine growing up in a world where everything your ancestors believed in was declared sinful, where you could no longer sing, pray, or heal as you always had. This historical trauma, this open wound, still echoes today in indigenous communities, often marginalized and stigmatized. But at the same time, it reveals the remarkable resilience of these peoples, who kept their spiritual roots firmly intact, even under the weight of oppression. And see, this silent knowledge, transmitted with such care, would eventually find, centuries later, those who would listen again. I won't reveal too much yet, but it's fascinating to think about how, after so much time hidden, these rituals would be rediscovered and gain global recognition. Resistance became inspiration, and the secret turned into revelation. And the one who played a central role in this extraordinary turn, well, that's a story for the next chapter of this journey. Maria Sabina, the guardian of tradition and the global rediscovery. Behold, after centuries of silence and repression, an extraordinary, almost mythical figure emerges. Someone who would become the bridge between two worlds. Maria Sabina, the Mazatec shaman. She wasn't just any healer, but a true guardian of an ancient tradition, passed down orally since time immemorial. In her small hut, nestled in the mountains of Oaxaca, Maria conducted the veladas, night ceremonies, where the Niños Santos, as she affectionately called the sacred mushrooms, were used to heal physical, spiritual, and emotional ailments. Her mission was clear: to be a channel, an interpreter between the visible and invisible worlds. It's fascinating to consider that while the modern world chased after technology, progress, and consumption, Maria remained steadfast, faithful to ancestral teachings. She did this not for fame or money. Her motivation was purely spiritual. And what a powerful lesson this is. Often, true wisdom is not found in the big urban centers or in books, but hidden in small communities, preserved by those who simply continue living according to their traditions. How many times do we ignore this, believing that only those who speak with a European accent or hold a degree are truly wise? Fate, however, had prepared an unexpected encounter that would change everything. One day, in the 1950s, ethnomycologist Gordon Wasson arrived in her village, drawn by rumors of ceremonial mushroom use. Maria, with the humility of someone who seeks nothing for herself, welcomed him and allowed him to participate in one of her ceremonies. There, under the influence of the Niños Santos, Wasson had a profound, transformative experience that he would never forget. And look at this, not only did he never forget, but he shared this knowledge with the world, publishing articles and recounting his experience in magazines like Life magazine. And so, the spotlight turned to Maria. This episode marked the beginning of the so-called psychedelic revolution in the West. Incredibly, an elderly woman from a remote Mexican village had, unintentionally, sparked the interest of scientists, artists, and spiritual seekers around the globe. Suddenly, what had been knowledge preserved almost in secret became an international topic. Figures like Timothy Leary, John Lennon, and even Steve Jobs would later acknowledge the importance of these substances for expanding consciousness. And it all started with Maria Sabina, the woman who never sought fame, but received it because she carried a true tradition. But don't think this was just a fairy tale. The sudden exposure also had harsh consequences. Maria's village was invaded by foreigners, curious adventurers who often didn't understand or respect the spiritual depth of the ritual. She herself suffered discrimination within her own community, accused of having profaned an ancestral secret. This teaches us, in a very practical way, about the importance of cultural respect when approaching traditions that are not our own. It's not enough to consume. We must understand and honor. Despite all the turmoil, Maria Sabina became a global symbol of spiritual resistance and ancestral heritage. Her image today is revered in books, documentaries, and even songs. For those who want to learn more about her journey, I recommend the book Maria Sabina, Vida de una Sabia Mazateca, written by Alvaro Estrada, which offers a sensitive and profound account of her life. It is an essential read for anyone wishing to understand not just mushroom rituals, but also the soul of a woman who knew how to be a bridge between such different worlds. And here's something curious. Maria's story didn't end with her passing. Quite the contrary. Her journey paved the way for the Western world to rethink its relationship with sacred mushrooms, no longer as a primitive or pagan practice, but as a powerful tool for expanding consciousness and spiritual healing. And it is precisely this movement, this explosion of interest and cultural transformation, that we will explore next, when the tradition of mushrooms collided with the vibrant psychedelic culture of the 1960s. The psychedelic era, mushrooms, science, and pop culture. Just imagine that secret hidden deep in the mountains of Oaxaca suddenly explodes into the streets of San Francisco, London, and Berlin. And so the psychedelic era was born, a true cultural earthquake that shook the 1960s. The boom of the counterculture turned sacred mushrooms not only into a tool for spiritual healing, but also a symbol of rebellion, freedom, and expanded consciousness. Young people with long hair and colorful clothes, fleeing social conventions, began seeking in mushrooms transcendental experiences, hoping to find a deeper meaning to existence, or simply to escape the rigidity of the square world. Within this context, psilocybin, the main psychoactive compound in mushrooms, became the focus of intense scientific curiosity. Renowned researchers like Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert, who later became Ram Dass, began conducting experiments to investigate the therapeutic potential of these substances. And what did they discover? That mushrooms could, in fact, help treat depression, anxiety, and even chemical dependency. Today, this research has intensified, and you can already find specialized clinics, like the Johns Hopkins Center for Psychedelic and Consciousness Research, applying rigorous protocols for psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. But here's the irony. What started as a sacred ritual with well-defined rules and intentions was quickly transformed many times into a recreational and hedonistic experience. At psychedelic parties and festivals like Woodstock, mushrooms were consumed as just another way to get high, often with little understanding of their spiritual potential. This created an evident tension. On one side, traditional use, seeing mushrooms as portals to the sacred. On the other, a reckless pursuit of intense experiences, not always safe or responsible. The globalization of these rituals became inevitable. From the Mexican forests, mushrooms made their way into ceremonies in Europe and North America, adopting new forms and interpretations. Today, for example, it's possible to participate in legalized psychedelic retreats in the Netherlands, where psilocybin truffles are consumed under the supervision of experienced facilitators, or in places like Costa Rica or Jamaica, where specialized centers offer profound experiences of self-discovery. It's tradition adapting to modern times, with all its benefits and challenges. It's interesting to note how, in this process of internationalization, various approaches to mushroom use have emerged. Some prioritize aesthetics and spectacle, lights, music, dance, while others rescue more introspective and ritualistic practices, often directly inspired by indigenous traditions. For those seeking an experience closer to ancestral use, I recommend looking for centers that work with intention and integration, offering not only the experience, but also emotional and spiritual support before and after the ritual. Trust me, it makes all the difference. This resurgence of interest in mushrooms has not been limited to alternative communities. The mental health and wellness industries have also embraced this movement. Today, we see Silicon Valley CEOs openly talking about their experiences with psilocybin microdosing to boost focus and creativity. In fact, the practice of microdosing, consuming sub-perceptual doses, has become a global trend, with people reporting improvements in productivity, mood, and even everyday spirituality. It's curious to think that while some seek to transcend existence, others simply want to be more efficient. And that's okay. And look how history keeps spinning. If before these rituals were secret, hidden from repression, today they are gaining more and more space, even on digital platforms, with facilitators, therapists, and researchers openly sharing their work. But this leads us to an important reflection. How much does this globalization respect ancestral tradition? How do we balance science, pop culture, and spirituality? These are questions that continue to resonate, and it's precisely about this transition, this boiling present and the future that is taking shape, that we will talk about in the next and final chapter of this fascinating journey. The present and the future, the new era of mushroom rituals. And here we are in the present, where what was once taboo is now increasingly seen as a legitimate path to healing and self-discovery. The revival of sacred mushroom rituals is happening all over the world, with a clear movement to value traditional shamanism. Indigenous peoples, such as the Mazatecs, the Shipibo-Conibo, and other Amazonian groups, continue to serve as references in leading ceremonies that unite spirituality, nature, and healing. More and more, people from the West are seeking out these rituals, not as a trend, but out of a real need to reconnect with something greater, something more authentic. At the same time, the therapeutic use of mushrooms is being regulated in several countries. States like Oregon in the United States have passed laws allowing the supervised use of psilocybin in clinical settings. Specialized centers now offer treatments for resistant depression, trauma, and anxiety disorders, always under the guidance of trained therapists. Look how science and tradition are beginning to walk hand in hand. What was marginalized and criminalized for centuries is now the subject of serious studies, with results that even impress the most skeptical. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows, and it's important to talk about that. The debate about cultural appropriation is growing stronger and more necessary. After all, when the West turns ancient rituals into wellness services or fast consumption products, there's a real risk of disrespecting these traditions and silencing the voices of the peoples who created this knowledge. One example? Urban shamanism festivals, where mushrooms are consumed with no connection to the ethics or original practices. So, if you plan to participate in a ritual, ask yourself, is this experience being conducted with respect and integrity? At the same time, it's beautiful to see how sacred mushrooms have become, more than ever, a bridge between the ancient and the modern. On one hand, they remain rooted in ancestral practices, full of symbolism and spirituality. On the other, they are being studied in laboratories equipped with cutting-edge technology. This fusion creates new possibilities. Imagine a future where hospitals and temples work together, offering not only medical treatments, but also profound spiritual experiences, promoting healing that goes beyond the body, reaching mind and soul. Spirituality, by the way, has never been more in vogue. Many speak of a new era where practices like meditation, conscious breathing, and the use of medicinal plants become central in the quest for a better quality of life. In this context, mushrooms stand out as a powerful tool for expanding consciousness. It's not uncommon to hear stories of people who, after a psilocybin experience, radically changed their lives, quitting toxic jobs, improving relationships, or dedicating themselves to environmental and social causes. It is, without a doubt, a force that transforms. But of course, this requires responsibility. Like any powerful tool, mushrooms must be used wisely. It's not just about taking it and waiting for a miracle. Preparation is needed, clear intention, a safe environment, and ideally, professional guidance. For those who want to start exploring this path, I recommend seeking reputable sources like MAPS, Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, or licensed clinics, and reading books like How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan, which offers an accessible and profound overview of this universe. And look how, even after millennia of history, the cycle doesn't close, it renews itself. What began with the Aztec and Mayan peoples survived centuries of repression, gained global recognition through Maria Sabina, and exploded in psychedelic culture. Now stands as one of the most promising frontiers of science, spirituality, and self-knowledge. And if you think this journey is over, well, get ready, because before we dive deep into this complete story, there's an essential introduction that will show you why all of this is far more relevant than you might imagine. So, after walking this journey together, tell me, how will you look at mushrooms from now on? Will you keep believing only what you've been told, that they're dangerous, forbidden, or useless? Or will you allow yourself to see the ancestral, spiritual, and therapeutic potential they carry? The choice is yours, but between you and me, isn't it time to stop fearing what you don't understand and start investigating with curiosity and respect the tools that nature places in your path? What's stopping you from seeking a true reconnection with your essence, your spirituality, and ancestral wisdom? Is it fear, prejudice, misinformation, or simply the comfort of living anesthetized, just going with the flow without ever questioning? And more, are you really taking care of your emotional and spiritual health, or are you just surviving, waiting for time to fix what only you can transform? Just imagine how much your life could change if you opened yourself to new rituals, new experiences, and new ways of self-discovery. And no, I'm not talking about following trends, but about walking a conscious path based on knowledge, respect, and intention. The world is rediscovering the power of mushrooms, and will you stay out of this revolution? Now, I want to challenge you. Which part of this journey impacted you the most? Was it learning about the history of the Aztecs and Mayans, the silent resistance of traditions, or the scientific rediscovery shaping the future? Write it down in the comments. Share your thoughts, your questions, your experiences. I make a point of reading and replying. Let's create a community together that seeks, questions, and transforms. And of course, if you want to keep exploring content like this, diving even deeper into what no one tells you about spirituality, science, and tradition, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss any upcoming journey, because believe me, what's coming next is even more surprising.